Hey friends, did you know that Medium Curious is brought to you by VerySoul? VerySoul is a platform where everyone can receive a free mediumship reading. And it provides us free. Really. And it provides a safe place for mediums in training to go practice, but also practice.
Yes, mediums need practice.
Yes, we do.
But did you know that VerySoul upholds vigorous standards for their working mediums? By requiring compelling evidence in every session, they ensure consistent, reliable, and meaningful experiences for every client. So go to verysoul.com, mediums you can trust.
Hey everybody, I'm Jane.
And I'm Sarah.
And you're listening to the Medium Curious podcast, the show that wants to know what it takes to be a medium.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And today we have on Andy Byng. He is an internationally renowned evidential medium, and he's also a brilliant teacher and a theologian and a philosopher and a reverend.
Yeah, and a ridiculously delightful human being. So let's talk to him, wanna?
Let's do it. Welcome, Andy. We're so thrilled to have you with us.
No, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I have taken a number of your courses and I've sat in on your spirit talks, and your classes and the way you teach mediumship has been so profound for me in my development. And I know several mediums who have studied with you and have taken your courses, and they all say the same thing.
Blushing
and
here.
I've also seen you, I have never had the chance to see you work live, but I've seen recordings of you demonstrate, and your connection to spirit is just so profound. And the storytelling as you communicate spirit's intent is so uplifting, and I've seen it move so many people. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I'll add on to that. I just was watching one of them yesterday, and it was like, dang, he makes it look so easy.
So you were the one person that's watched it.
Not true. Well, I wonder if you want to begin there. I know there's so much to cover, and we're both so excited you're here, but your philosophy of storytelling is really intriguing to me. And most of our listeners either are mediums or budding mediums, or, are coming up in this world, or at the very minimum are curious about mediumship, obviously. But I wonder if you could just share a little bit about your philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the storytelling part of, which has now become a big part of my teaching, but it's been part of my mediumship before that, came quite naturally, really. It was something that just, it was actually this old guy, maybe about 15 years ago now, maybe a bit longer than that. His name was Ron. He used to belong, he's passed away now to the spirit world, but he used to belong to a spiritualist church that I used to serve called Stourbridge Spiritualist Church. Ron was the type of guy that always had something to say. He'd always give you some advice, from, and he was a member of the committee there, but he was also a long-time spiritualist. And after the demonstration, he came up to me and said, can I say a few things, Andy? And I always used to oblige, so I was like waiting to hear what he was going to say. And he actually said something very nice. He said, you know what I love about your mediumship? And I said, well, what's that, Ron? He said, well, I really feel like I get to know the people and the lives of the people. And after he said that to me, it was like a light bulb moment for myself as the medium, because he pointed that out, and that then became something I began to become more conscious of within my own work, which then allows you then to start to look at how to develop that to teach others that. If you think about what it is that what it really is that the spirit world is trying to achieve, I think we have to go back to the real fundamentals of what mediumship is about. And the first thing is to recognize that every communicator that comes from the spirit world, they have a need. And that need is actually sort of two-pronged. The first part of that need is a need to establish who they are, and the other aspect of that need is then to recognise that their message, what they've really come to say to their loved one, isn't really evidence. Now, if you think about it, if you was in the spirit world today, and let's say I was your friend, and you hadn't spoken to me for 30 years, would you really want to come back from the spirit world to say, my name's Jane and I used to be a host of a podcast? Probably not. You'd probably want to say something about our relationship, or something about how, what our relationship was like, what it meant to you, something maybe to help me move forward in my own life and expression.
Yeah.
But the problem is that if we go straight into that message, there's not enough evidence there to know it is them.
Right.
But equally, we have to understand, well, where has that message come from the communicator, and how do we do that? Well, it's by recognizing that it's a real intelligence that you're working with within the communications, that the message is actually part of the it's within the evidence that we're expressing. So what the challenge is for the spirit person is to achieve that need, that two-headed need simultaneously. And they do that by sharing a part of their life that will not only establish who they are. And of course, if you're doing a demonstration of mediumship, people don't realize this, but if you've got, let's say, 200 people in the audience, although there's 200 people in the audience, there could be 2,000 to 4,000 people in the spirit world that could communicate.
Right.
Because they might all know 20, 30 people in the spirit world themselves.
Yeah.
So that part of their life they have to share. We have to go deep enough into understanding that part of their life to establish that they are who we say they are, that they belong to you, the individual, and nobody else in the room. But part of their life that they share with us also is leading the medium to understand the message. And so I think a lot of people, when they move into mediumship, they have this sort of, what they do is that they focus on evidence, and they want bits of evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we do that, we actually ignore the intelligence of the communication itself. That is that, let's say, I want to come back to talk to my son about his job. I will probably share with you my work life as the spirit person, because that would recognize who I am, but it would also lead you to understand that I'm here to talk about my son's work. And I would share different parts of that work expression, different qualities I had perhaps, or different experiences that I had at work that we could then use after you used it as evidence of me. So it's come from the spirit world because it's evidence of me, the communicator. The medium then can use that symbolically through and being inspired by the spirit world to use it symbolically to then unfold the message that's there. So I've really moved away from this idea that our job is to give bits of information, and some of those bits of information might be really good. Instead, I believe that the very first impression that we become aware of is the impression that the spirit person is sharing with us, and that obviously they're sharing it with us, but it's that first impression is taking us to the part of their life that they need to share with us to recognize who they are, but to lead us to the message. And so our job is just to unfold that aspect of their life. And you see, this is where the storytelling comes in, because it's not that we're creating a story. It's just that the way that we live life through time creates a narrative all by itself. So we naturally tell stories. That's what human beings do, because that's the nature of our human experiences. And of course, when we're working with the spirit world, that's exactly what we are tapping into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of telling stories, will you tell us your story? I know I was looking at your website, and I was looking at how impressive your studies are, because it looks like you discovered your interest in mediumship just at this pivotal moment where you then were able to pursue knowledge of that in school. So it looks like you had 6 years of studying history of mediumship, religion, ethics, philosophy, and that's an incredible toolbox to have with what you're currently doing.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little bit backwards, to be honest with you. I started work I actually started work at the age of 10. I had a little car washing business when I was 10 years of age. I used to, and then so I've always worked. I've always actually enjoyed creating things in whatever way I can. But at the age of 18, I actually started my first career. I got headhunted from when I was doing what we call A levels back in the UK. I guess it's sort of like your sort of high school diploma, I think, equivalent. Is it the SATs that you have before you go to university? That's what it is. Yeah. So it's that type of exam. After I finished those, there's one of the large Big Four accounting companies, multinational companies, that asked me to become part of their team, and as a trainee, like a very junior member. So that's what I started, and then I didn't actually. So I sort of pursued a career in accounting. Probably look like an accountant today, actually, don't I? So yes, for the part. But I actually did accounting. As a full-time job until I
at
was
18.
18 to how old would I have been? I was 2010 when I went to university. So I was 25. So I did it for 7 years.
Wow.
Okay.
And so I was serving as a medium and having a full-time career in accounting at the same time for 7 years. And then obviously, I mean, it was a very poor choice at 18. I wasn't very psychic at 18, I don't think, choosing accounting. And then I decided then to go to university when I was 25. So in a nutshell, because my story is quite a long one, and there's probably more fascinating subjects to talk about than my background. But what really happened was it starts. My mediumship was always there, but I think hindsight is definitely 2020, isn't it? I didn't really. Although I can look back now and say, yeah, my mediumship was always there from a young boy. It was something that I was really unconscious of. I had these experiences, but I used to put it down to my imagination, or
so many people do.
Yeah, or I used to think I was scared of ghosts, but I was really having experiences. And when I was 16, I actually I fell in love for the first time. The thing was, back then, it sounds silly to say now, but I met this girl online when I was 16. Well, when I was 16, which is quite a number of years ago now. What is it, 24 years ago, I think. Is it 24? Yeah, 24 years ago. So this is why I'm not an accountant. I can't even count. But so 24 years ago, meeting people online was not the common
norm.
Thing. Was not the norm.
Yeah.
And so she lived in a place called Sheffield, which is about 2 hours north of where I'm from, in Birmingham. And I used to tell my mum and dad that I was going to the city to see friends, but I would secretly get the train and go up to Sheffield, like 2 hours out of the city, and we'd have these sort of rendezvous.
Ooh, both Jane and I have 16-year-olds.
Yeah,
so
this is very exciting to hear about.
Definitely check their train tickets. So I sort of had this sort of clandestine relationship for a couple of years, actually, between 16 and like when I was 18. And as I said, I got headhunted by PwC to start as an auditor for them. And when I got offered the position, they said, well, you can have a job in London if you want, or Edinburgh, or Birmingham, Manchester, or Sheffield. So when they said Sheffield, my ears pricked up a little bit then, because I was like, well, I could actually move to Sheffield and then be with my at that time I was a 2-year partner. girlfriend and we can start this new life. So that's what I decided to do. And as all good love affairs, well, first time relationships are not really an affair, but a first time relationship, it ended quite quickly.
Oh,
Within a
no.
couple of weeks of me being
Oh.
there.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, heartbreak.
And the thing is that at the time, as an auditor, I was traveling around the country and parts of Europe auditing, doing my job. And if you've ever been to an accounting office, they're not 18-year-old kids. They're, they look much like I do now, middle-aged, balding gentlemen and women. The women aren't necessarily balding, though. They are. And she was the only person that I knew in Sheffield. And my mum and dad still didn't even know at the time about her because I'd kept it secret for 2 years and I never told them why I was going to Sheffield.
Oh, wow.
So I ended up really going through a really tough time because obviously when you're living on your own for the first time, you've got no friends.
Mm-hmm.
I was too proud to actually say to my mum and dad, look, I made a mistake. So for a good year and a half, I was just sort of like trying to carry on.
Yeah.
And I had lots of spare time, like in the evenings and weekends. Weekends were particularly bad. And I used to find myself sort of just walking around the city aimlessly. I sound like Paddington Bear, but I was a little bit like a lost sheep. I just used to walk around. And I look back now and I realise, well, maybe I was walking around, I was trying to find something.
Yeah.
Right. It might have been her, it might have been friends, it might have been an answer to why it happened this way. But one evening, I happened upon this. I remember it was on like the road that I lived on, and at the top of the road there was this like door in a wall, and I saw people queuing up. So I don't know why, but I just decided to. I didn't even know what they were queuing for. It could have been anything. I just stood in the queue. And I thought, well, I'll see what it is. And when they got through the door, it was a small Buddhist centre it was there to sort of drop in meditation evening.
Uh-huh.
So I started to actually just practice meditation for no other reason, to be honest with you, at the time, to fill time. And it was a chance of escaping the depression that I was in. I really started. I took that practice to heart. I was doing 9 hours of meditation a week. I'd do like 1 hour a day on the evening when I got home to kill some time, and then on a weekend I would do it 1 hour twice a day, just because there was lots of time. And slowly but surely, all the things that I'd gone through in my life, from the past and so on, really started coming to the surface. You might not realise it, but I actually suffer from a speech impediment. I have a stutter, and I've had to kind of control it through speech therapy for lots of years. But all of those moments when people used to bully me, like you get a bit bullied or people making fun, I had to go through all of that. I had quite a tough time at school in my sort of middle teenage years. I had to face all of that. My grandfather's passing when I was 10. That was a big thing that for those sort of 8 years, you don't really process at 10. You just kind of get through it. Yeah. So there was a lot of things that were sort of bubbling to the surface. And one morning, while all this was happening, see, I told you it was a long story. I'm sorry to tell you the stories. While all this was happening, and it was a Saturday morning, my mum woke me up and she said, "Oh, look, I've got something to tell you. Your granddad's passed away. My other grandfather passed away." And that was my breaking point. I'd actually broke my elbow. Ow. I'd gone through all this stuff with this girl. I hadn't told my mum and dad still at this point what had been going on. I'd had 2 years of pretty hard time. Then when my grandfather passed in that same sort of period, I sort of broke down and told my parents what had been happening. And they obviously was like, "What are you doing? Just come home." So I did. And I remember waking up one morning then with this thought of, I can communicate with the spirit world. And it wasn't actually a big sort of revelation. But it wasn't a thought either. It was a conviction. It was something that it was really an acknowledgement of all that work I'd been doing within the meditation, all of that personal development work. I'd been peeling back the layers of myself slowly without even realizing that I was doing it. And the mediumistic quality now, and that spiritual gift that had been there, had now really come to the surface. And that moment that I now recognize was when I became really consciously aware of that. It was a thought that wouldn't go away. And it wasn't even a thought. Like I said, it's this conviction, this sort of itch within myself that I couldn't scratch. And by the time I got back to Birmingham, I was really quite interested in actually now having to do some research about this. It wasn't that mediumship was new to me. I knew what it was. My mum used to go for sittings when I was a kid. She'd always gone to mediums for sittings. We used to have mediums around at the house where they used to do sittings for my family, and friends. Mum used to get like a little party sort of thing for sittings, And my mum and dad have always been quite open about the idea of the spirit world. It was something, and my grandparents were too. When I look back now, my grandfather, who passed when I was 10, he was a medium. My mum and dad are mediumistic themselves. My sister's could be a very good medium if she wanted to be. So it was always, the idea was always there. The knowledge of what it was always there. But it was in this period now where I really was called to start to having to at least research and understand what this was. So I'd done some research when I got back to Birmingham. So this would have been around the October time. And I found on the internet a spiritualist church that was quite close by to me, maybe 15 minutes drive. So one Thursday evening, I decided to drive to it just because I was going to go on the Sunday and I wanted to know where it was and where to park, and I was a bit excited by it as well. I think it was more curiosity. I was a bit impatient. I didn't want to wait. So I drove over there, and when I got into the car park, I saw a line of people waiting, queuing up, but there was nothing advertised on the program on the internet. So I got out and I just joined the queue again, like I always do. I just joined the queue. See what's happening. And this time it happened to be their open circle. And so I sort of like, I've just come for this to see just come to see the service and to see where it was. And so, you're here now, so why don't you just come in? And I'm a bit of a unicorn. I'm not sure if you've all been to mediumship seminars. There's not many men that attend. And there's not many.
It is very
true. There's not many teenage men.
20-year-old men,
yeah.
No. 19, yes. 20 at this point. So I obliged. I went in and I sat down in the circle. There's about 20 people, and they started off with a meditation. So I just sat and did what I normally do at home. And I remember the circle leader coming up after the meditation and said, you sit really well. I think she was quite surprised. I said, well, I've been doing it for a few years now. She said, okay then, so you're going to do a contact for me? I said, oh, what? You're going to do a contact? I said, well, what's that? Well, you're going to communicate with the spirit world. Well, I've never done anything before. It's my first time I've ever been here. How do you do it? Well, you're going to have to learn. Just get up. So that was it. That was my training. Get up, do it.
Wow.
What?
And I remember in the moment, I didn't actually. I think youth does help. You kind of feel, at that age you're quite fearless anyway. But I wasn't really nervous. I was just something, because something happened in that moment. Something changed within me, and with that, and so I've had no training at this point. This is my first ever experience, and I'll never forget it because it was my first experience. But there was about 20 people in the room, and I remember going direct to this woman, and I said to her, your nephew's in the spirit world, and she said, yeah. I said, yeah, he used to drive a red Ford Fiesta car, and he crashed into the side of a tree.
Oh.
And she said, yeah. I said, it's his birthday today. She said,
Oh,
she said, how do you know that? I said, well, at home, you've got a bay window. And in that bay window, you've got a table. And on that table, you've got a photograph of him. And there's a candle. And you lit the candle and said happy birthday before you left. And then she just sort of broke into tears.
Oh.
And that was my first ever contact that I'd ever given.
That's so beautiful.
And
wow.
honestly, this is lots of students when they come and, you know, they come to me and they talk to me, obviously. One of the big things with students is confidence. And this questioning of, am I a medium? Am I not a medium? You know, and it sounds, I'm not sure if this sounds good or not, but I never had that. Like I said, in all that, I've been developing my mediumship for 2 years without knowing I was developing it.
Right.
I'd done a lot of the personal development work that had brought my mediumship to the surface. And I had a genuine, I guess you would call, I don't really like the term, but I use it now. That was my awakening. You know, I became conscious of that. And so the mediumship was already on the surface. And I already had this, so I said, it's not a thought, it was a conviction, it was a calling that I knew I could. Yeah. And then I had that experience. And that was enough for me to accept. And so after that moment, after that first contact, I can honestly say that I never questioned if I was ever a medium or not after that. That was enough for me to find, to accept that there was something there. And I think that was a real game changer for me, because I never really went through, I never really went through this sort of fight with myself. I just always accepted I could do it after that point. And this is and I think some people then, as I, in my early years of my development, some people might have took me the wrong way. They might have thought that I was overconfident or cocky, but I wasn't. I was just sure of myself. I was just sure that I could do it. I didn't have any doubts, which is very unusual, I think. But I think the way that I entered into my mediumship was quite unusual. Yeah. And, I remember when I first, when I first met a teacher, they'd come to the same church, King's Heath. They come there to do a one-day workshop. I've been doing it about 2 weeks at that point. And the circle leader had asked me if I would do like a student demonstration. Now that's very, like, if I had a student now that said to me after 2 weeks of developing the mediumship, I'm doing the student demonstration, I think, what? But that's what I said. The teacher said, well, do any of you demonstrate? And I put my hand up. I said, well, I'm going to have to do a student demonstration. How long have you been doing it for? 2 weeks. I thought that was normal. Right? So I think they thought that I was quite cocky, obviously just from that response. But I was just it was actual naivety. I didn't know any better. I was just being honest. Yeah. And there was this guy in the workshop, and I know that the teacher told me afterwards what they'd done, and he was a guy that was going to be that people thought he was a difficult guy. So he put me with him on purpose to kind of try and teach me a lesson.
Oh, wow.
So, and I remember doing this contact. I was sitting opposite him, and I was a little bit intimidated. And I remember looking to over my shoulder, and the teacher was standing there listening to, by the wall, but not so close, but close enough to hear. And I remember this contact. I was aware of. First thing I said was, "You've got a wife in the spirit world." And this guy wasn't an old guy. He was probably in his 40s, maybe, probably my age now. And he said, "Yeah." I said, "But your dad's also in the spirit world as well." Yeah, I said, "Your dad's name's Tom." He went, "Yeah." And I said, "Your name's Tom?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "And you got a son called Tom?" And he said, "Yeah, I have." I said, "Your son went to Bourneville Junior School?" He said, "Yeah, he does. Yeah, his name, I can't remember his name now, but I was like, he was in my class at school. It was his kid's dad that I knew. And I never met his dad before. I knew the kid though."
Yeah.
So it was like in
Whoa.
these early experiences that I was having, I think because I just accepted and I didn't care.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
genuinely didn't
Right.
care. I was
That's
just,
right.
and that's the thing. If you have that understanding of acceptance of your mediumship,
Mm.
you don't care. It's not that you don't care about what you're doing. You care about what you're doing, but you don't care if you're right or wrong. You don't
Mm.
question it. You just assume that
Yeah.
you are. And this is the thing that I think with lots of students, that when they struggle with their mediumship in the beginnings, it isn't because the mediumship's not present. It's because they question. They don't.
Yeah.
They're fighting with themselves. Whereas I
Mm-hmm.
never did. I just always
Yeah.
accepted and just went with it because I knew I could. I knew I could do it. I knew it was there, and that for me is the biggest. You know, if I can teach anyone anything from my beginnings, I think the biggest thing that we need to learn is a couple of things. The first thing is that I never went to seek mediumship. I I went to look within myself just to improve my conditions that I was in at the time. And I I started not by trying to do mediumship. I started by understanding who I was. I actually started by
Yeah.
looking within, and this is what I don't realize now. I mean, I realize this now, but I didn't realize it back then. When I was in that period where I felt inclined to just walk aimlessly around the city, it was actually me at that period now searching for myself.
Yeah.
I was looking for, I was trying to, I knew there was something to be discovered, and I knew that I had to find who I was. And that manifested itself in that need or that feeling of walking somewhere, trying to find something new, searching a new city. But what it was really, that urge really was this part of me now that was trying to find who I really was as a person. And that's the journey that I went on first, you know.
So what impresses me so much about you is that you have this relationship with spirit. It feels like this holy relationship that you have. So when you were going on that journey for yourself, was it the awakening that you're talking about? Was that realizing that you too are spirit? Was that part of it?
I think that came later, if
Okay.
I'm honest with you. I mean, I think the first thing is that the first point is that when we find our mediumship, we shouldn't be searching for it. We shouldn't be,
Mm.
or we shouldn't be saying, "Oh, I see it. I've watched a medium doing this
Yep.
demonstration or sitting. That looks really interesting. I want to have a go." We should be looking within ourselves, and as we peel back those layers of ourselves through that personal development work, the spiritual gifts and of whatever they are that are there present will naturally come to the surface, and when they
Mhm.
do, that then calls us into the expression. And that
Mm.
then when that happens, I knew, and it was right because it has been right, that was the moment that it was the right time for me and the right time for the spirit world to begin working in partnership with each other.
Mm.
In the beginnings, what it was for me, and this is, I think it's important to say, and this might be surprising, but I don't actually hold, I don't put the spirit world on a pedestal. For me, the people that I have built a relationship with in the spirit world, what you'd call my guides, helpers, the way that I relate to your loved ones in the spirit world if they come to communicate with me as the medium, and my own loved ones, is, like I said, it's a partnership, it's a friendship. I have respect for them and reverence for them, but only the same as I have when I meet you for the first time. I treat them as real people,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's important because the spirit world has to become real. But it also, we have to recognize that the spirit people are just people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think sometimes when we see them as these sort of beings to be worshipped, we can't have that close relationship because we never feel worthy of them. We perhaps hold them at arm's length, as we would if we were, worshipping, a deity of some kind. Whereas actually, because they don't, when you worship a deity, it doesn't always seem as though they are us. That it seems in some way divorced or separate from us.
Yeah.
But actually, and this is what Spiritualism has taught me, that God is within me. And so if God is within me, and that is the foundation of my essence, and also God is within you and within the people in the spirit world, we're all actually equals. We're friends.
Yeah.
And there is a respect there and a reverence for the spirit world, but it's not one of worship, it's one of companionship, of collaboration, of partnership. And if we're talking about, especially as a medium, if we're talking about being in partnership with the spirit world, we can't be in partnership if we don't feel equal to them. Because a partnership cannot be a partnership if you feel that you're better than or less than the other party. The same as within a marriage,
Yeah.
And so I think that's important to realise too.
Andy, I want to ask you, just because I think, we have listeners all around the world, but the large majority are in the US, and spiritualism is not as known. There are certainly churches in the US, but I wonder if you can just share with our audience a little bit about what a spiritualist service is. And you just began to talk a little bit about the philosophy, but just because some folks won't have context,
I think what's important to, first of all, I think what's important to realise is that, for me, you don't need to, how do I put this? I've been heavily influenced by the spiritualist tradition, and the truth is that our understanding of this type of mediumship, or this manifestation of mediumship in terms of public demonstrations, private sittings, and inspirational speaking, so on and so forth, it takes its origins from modern spiritualism in 1848 in America. It starts in America, moves into the into Europe and Britain. So I think it's important to, even if we don't consider ourselves to be spiritualists, I think it's important to have an appreciation of the philosophy and teachings of modern spiritualism, just because that's where a lot of the ideas that you're being taught, whether you know you are or not, is coming from that tradition itself. But equally, you don't need to be a spiritualist to be a medium, and that's where I think, for me, spiritualism is something that we should, we should enter into on our own volition. And I think spiritualism, as weirdly, you think people do demonstrations of mediumship, so it can almost seem that we're trying to convert people into spiritual, but that's never been the case. The demonstration of mediumship has always been giving you an experience that allows you to come to your own conclusion and really partake in your own personal investigation into the subject, and these experiences provide that evidence that allow you to draw those conclusions. So a spiritualist church or a spiritualist service, it kind of depends on what type of service you go to, if I'm honest. So you will have what's called a divine service, which is more of a religious service. And you'll also have evenings of mediumship or demonstrations of mediumship, which is really just a demonstration of mediumship. And depending on the church and depending on the situation, sometimes those demonstrations may start with a prayer, for instance, or a hymn or music. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the times, I demonstrate now lots in theatres or in public halls or whatever. It's just a demonstration of mediumship. And so, if we talk about the divine service, it's really, and this is, I guess, a word that you have to get comfortable with. First of all, it is a service that is the worship, and when I say worship, I mean a celebration of creation, that creative power of the spirit. And this is something else that might help some of your listeners, is that often people we get confused about the word spirit, because we use it interchangeably to signify 15, 20 different things within the philosophy. But when we're talking about
Yeah.
the spirit, what I'm really talking about is that creative power, that universal power that brings all things into life. It's really what's called a divine service. It's a celebration of that divine power within the world and within us. And so you'll probably find that that service will start with a prayer invoking that power, and really it's about experiencing that power of God from within ourselves. Not, what the spiritualists will really understand is that God isn't what we call ab extra. It isn't something divorced from creation. And a lot of the sort of Abrahamic faiths suggest that it is. You've all heard that hymn, "He's got the whole world in his hands," the Christian hymn. If you think about it,
Mm-hmm.
it's an image of a set of hands with the world inside. That the hands of God are some way separate from or divorced from the thing that it's created. Whereas within the spiritualist understanding is that, no, that power, it isn't a personality, it isn't a man or a woman, it's not a personality that we need to communicate with. It's a power that runs through all things, and that power has certain divine qualities within it. What I would consider to be the sort of Aristotelian virtues, and so the first part of the service then is that prayer, but then it will move into an address, and an address is really an inspired talk that hopes to sort of invoke that power of creation from within each individual. We're trying to inspire your soul, and to give. It's really the address is a message for everybody. If you do a good address properly, you can actually inspire and touch the whole audience, let's say, or the congregation. So there will be an address, and then that's usually then followed by a demonstration of mediumship. And what people again don't realise is, and this is another thing about what our purpose is as mediums, it's called a demonstration of mediumship, and it follows the address because the mediumship should be providing evidence of the philosophical ideas that have been embedded within the philosophy that's been given. So the mediumship is a demonstration of that philosophy, which obviously is the philosophy of survival, but also the philosophy of the spiritual aspect of ourself. Because if we can provide evidence that a soul is real and it exists and it's independent of the physical body, it shows us that there's this spiritual aspect to us. And
it's so powerful.
Yeah. And when we recognize that for the first time, it should cause the individual to then begin to ask pertinent questions about themselves. If my granddad survived, if my mum survived, if my child has survived death, and they have this immortal part to them, well, what does that mean for me today living here? What is that immortal part of me? What is the purpose of that part of me? What is it trying to strive for? What qualities does it have? Who am I? And so that the mediumship really is not, it is about reuniting two people from together again. That's what's happening. But there's a much greater message than I'm alive and I'm well. The greater message is about inspiring people to look within themselves, to go on their own personal spiritual journey of fulfillment. And that's really what that divine service is trying to do. It's trying to encourage people through the address and through the demonstration to begin to explore their own inner world.
That is so beautifully said. I was just reading your website and you've got this quote on there. And I think what you've spoken to just kind of sums this up. Mediumship ought to be presented in a rational way, as it is not supernatural. It just operates within natural laws, which we do not yet fully understand. Can you speak a little bit about culture, where we're at right now as a society, and how this practice of mediumship can be so helpful to where we are today?
I try my best not to talk about politics because it's usually something that can be quite divisive.
Sure.
But what I think I think we can all agree on is that neoliberal democracies, Western democracies, we've been going through a period of, I think, that can be dated, go back to 2008 for me. When I look back, which ironically is around the time that I became a medium, when we look back, when I look back to 2008, we remember that the first global credit crisis that we had the global meltdown. I think what's happened since then, and this is just what I've observed in the world, is that no government really, and successive governments across the whole world, have really failed to really created policies and environments that people that suffered from that in that crisis, that financial crisis, have been able to rebuild their lives back in a physical way. What two things that can happen, and I think COVID did this too, is that we're at a point, I think, where there's so much anxiety and strife of trying just to make ends meet and actually trying to live a life and survive, that often we can then become preoccupied with the physical, and we actually forget about community. It's that old saying, isn't it, that charity starts at home. And I think there is something in the idea that when you feel secure and safe within your own life, and you're living a life that perhaps you feel that you're in some way prospering in some way, that there is parts of you then that can turn your attention to the wider community. But when you're struggling yourself, then what happens is we look not necessarily inwards within ourselves, but we look at our own life and say, well, I've got to make sure that I survive. And I think we're seeing that around the world. I think what mediumship can do is it can remind us of the spiritual nature of who we truly are. And again, I think it's a cop out, to say, well, that has to be more important than the physical, because no, we've got two aspects to ourselves. The soul is actually striving every day to express itself in the most natural way that it can, but the physical world and the conditions that we're facing in the physical world are either going to hinder or help that soul flourish in the way it needs to. And I think people are going through that period of striving for themselves. But at times then, when with what's happening in the world, and especially with COVID, the physical obstacles to overcome become almost insurmountable, or at least we feel that they're insurmountable, which creates that despair within ourselves. I think the greater message is twofold. I think for me, I think Nietzsche famously said that when we have a why, we can cope with almost any how. And I think what can easily happen, and I think it does happen when we go through these periods of difficulty and strife, is actually we forget the why. We get so lost. We can't even see the wood for the trees because of what we're trying to process and cope with, and one thing seems to come after the other, and one thing after the other, after the other, after the other. That we actually get so caught up in the physical that we forget what the why was in the first place. Why? Who am I? What's my reason for being? And I believe we all have a reason for being, and I believe that mediumship can, like I say, it doesn't provide evidence of that reason for being, but it's a catalyst that helps us to look within ourselves. And I very much believe that each one of us, although we come from that universal power of the spirit, which is the same in all of us, at the moment that we're conceived, that power actually manifests in an individual way. And in the way that power manifests with us, it gives rise to talents and gifts. For the medium, the natural expression of their soul should be the mediumistic expression, which is why we are the medium, because we're just trying to express ourselves in the most natural way. But I believe everybody has gifts and talents, not necessarily mediumship, but the gift of writing, the gift of teaching, the gift of being a parent, the gift of, charity. Whatever their gift is, it's a unique gift. For me, the meaning of life is us looking within, discovering what those gifts are, and then dedicating our life to perfecting and unfolding whatever talent that might be. I think once we find that thing within, that gives us the why, and then the how becomes we can cope with. But once we have that why that has brought us into being, what that purpose of our soul is trying to strive for, when we go through these difficult times, they are difficult. It would be a lie if I said it wasn't difficult for me. The way that the world is, the way that the things that we've all experienced, from COVID to recessions to austerity to whatever it's been, it doesn't take away the suffering. It doesn't take away the anxiety or the difficulties that we face, but it definitely can give us resolve to overcome. And I think that's what we have to hold on to. And I think there is something quite beautiful in the difficulties that we have faced, is that there are communities of people that come together in the most difficult of times.
Mm-hmm.
There was in where I live on the wetlands in Ontario, so we kind of, the wetlands sounds posh. It's actually a swamp. If we're being honest, it's a swamp. We got flooded really badly this year. We had lots of snow, we had a lot of ice went off and so on. And in the moments of those floods, we were out of power some people were out of power for 2 weeks here.
Oh.
But the communities come together, help each other. Mm. That's the power of mediumship too, in action. That once we actually, in those moments of real turmoil, the human spirit kicks in and we recognise we actually all come together. Not even consciously, we just do it instinctively, because we realise we are all one. We realise that we're all on a rock floating in space, and we're all in this together.
Yeah.
And it's that power of creation that is the glue that keeps us all together.
Oh, wow. That's actually kind of an amazing place to wrap up in the full global floating on a rock feeling with you, Andy. It's just such a pleasure to listen to you and your philosophy. And the good news is our listeners can find you in your salons, the Spirit Talk series. So they don't have to worry that this is all they get. They can come find you there. And I know, like Sarah mentioned, that several of our dear friends study with you, and I can certainly see why your teachings are so, I don't know how to explain it. The way it comes in and the way it lands, it makes me feel so hopeful. I think that's what I walk away from this conversation, is feeling really hopeful, not only in the mediumship part of me, but just everything you shared was really beautiful. So thank you.
No, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it. I could have talked for another couple of hours, so I was
Well, we'll have to have you back.
Well, we'd love to have you back.
Anytime. I'm more than happy to come back for you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Andy.
Pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Very Soul is our sponsor for Medium Curious. Jane and I are both Very Soul mediums.
Oh, yes, we are. verysoul.com, y'all. Inspired by spirit, guided by love, and brought to life by mediums. Medium Curious is made possible
by Jane Morgan Editing.
Sarah Rathke made the amazing music. Mix by Podcast Engineers.
And you can help Medium Curious by downloading the episodes
and following our socials. And the dogs under the desk in Hawaii are Kalea and Domino.
And Trixie in California.